Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we step into one of the most breathtaking and inspiring moments in biblical history. The Story of Esther, stunning animated Bible story of courage and divine destiny. Imagine living in a world where every choice could mean life or death, where secrets must be guarded closely, and where one brave decision could change the future of an entire people. That is the world Esther lived in, and tonight her story comes alive in a way that will grip your heart. Our journey begins in the mighty Persian Empire, where King Xerxes, the most powerful ruler of his time, throws a banquet so extravagant it seems no one can rival his wealth or glory. But behind all the glitter of gold and royal feasts, something unexpected happens. A queen is dismissed in a storm of pride and anger, and suddenly the throne beside the king is left empty. This vacancy sets in motion a search that will forever alter history. Out of countless young women brought into the palace, one orphaned Jewish girl, humble, kind, and quietly brave, will rise to become queen. Her name is Esther. But Esther's story is not simply about wearing a crown. It is about courage, faith, and divine destiny in the face of unimaginable risk. Esther hides her true identity as a Jewish woman, living among a people exiled and vulnerable in a foreign land. She listens carefully to the wisdom of her cousin and guardian, Mordecai, who has raised her since childhood. Mordecai warns her that being queen does not mean safety. A shadow is rising within the palace walls. A man of great pride and fury, Haman, second in power, only to the king, burns with hatred against Mordecai and all the Jewish people. And soon his plan will threaten their very existence. The tension builds as Esther finds herself at the center of a dangerous secret. The king does not know who she truly is. Haman schemes for revenge, and Mordecai urges her to take a stand. But to speak up could cost Esther everything: her crown, her life, and perhaps the future of her people. What would you do if you had to risk everything for others? Would you remain silent, hoping someone else would rise up? Or would you step forward into the unknown, even if it meant standing alone? As the walls of the palace whisper with rumors and danger grows closer, Esther must decide whether to keep her secret or reveal her truth. Her voice, a single voice in the vast Persian Empire, holds the power to change the course of history. But the risk is deadly. The king has not called for her in weeks, and to approach him uninvited could mean immediate execution. Yet, time is running out. This is not just the story of a queen. It is the story of courage that blossoms in the face of fear, of faith that shines in the darkest of moments, and of divine destiny unfolding in ways no one could imagine. Esther's choice will determine the fate of her people, and as the day of decision approaches, the question lingers. Will she remain silent, or will she risk it all and step into her destiny? Stay with me as we dive deeper into the heart of this stunning Bible story, where suspense builds with every scene. The crown may glitter, but behind it lies a life-or-death battle of courage, sacrifice, and faith. And right now, Esther is standing at the edge of her greatest test. What she does next will shock the world forever. The palace of Persia was a place of dazzling beauty, but also of hidden dangers. Golden pillars rose high into the sky, walls glimmered with precious stones, and the king's halls overflowed with feasts and music. Yet for all its splendor, whispers of fear and jealousy crept through its corridors. Behind the curtains of power, one man's anger had the power to turn celebration into sorrow. Haman, the king's trusted official, carried himself with pride, expecting every man to bow before him. But Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused. He would not bend his knee to a man whose heart was filled with arrogance. That simple act of defiance lit a fire of rage in Haman. a rage that would soon grow into a plot of unthinkable destruction. While Mordecai kept his eyes open to danger, Esther tried to live quietly within the palace walls. She had been chosen queen for her beauty and grace, but her true strength was still hidden. The king admired her, yet Esther knew she was not truly safe. Her secret identity as a Jewish woman could not be revealed. Not now, not when enemies surrounded her people. She carried her secret like a fragile flame, knowing that if it was exposed, the consequences could be deadly. Haman's hatred, however, was not satisfied with punishing only Mordecai. His pride demanded more. He wanted to wipe out an entire people, to erase the Jews from the Persian Empire in one single stroke. He began to weave a plan in the shadows, using his position close to the king to give his words weight. With clever lies and careful manipulation, he prepared to make his case. To the king, it might sound like a matter of loyalty, of securing the empire. But in truth, it was fueled only by revenge and cruelty. As days passed, Mordecai discovered the dark plot and sent urgent word to Esther. His message carried both warning and hope. Only she, placed unexpectedly in the palace, had the chance to stop this disaster. Yet the path before her was full of risk. To approach the king uninvited was to gamble with her life. No one, not even the queen, was above this law. The penalty was death unless the king extended his golden scepter. Every step toward the throne could be her last. Still, destiny seemed to press closer, like a storm gathering strength. Esther stood at a crossroads. She could stay silent, hiding her true identity, and hope someone else would rise to save her people. Or she could step forward, risking everything, and trust that her courage was not her own, but part of a greater plan. The question now was not only about survival, it was about purpose, and the moment of decision was drawing nearer with each passing breath. Haman's scheme moved forward with chilling precision. He cast lots, known as Purim, to decide the date when his plan would be carried out, believing chance would favor his cruelty. The chosen day was months away, but that gave him time to spread his poison. He approached King Xerxes with carefully chosen words, hiding his true intentions under the veil of loyalty. He spoke of a people scattered throughout the empire, people with laws different from everyone else, who he claimed did not obey the king's commands. To Haman, they were dangerous, unworthy of mercy, and with his silver tongue, he persuaded the king to sign a decree. With the king's seal pressed onto parchment, a death sentence for the Jews was set into motion. The news traveled quickly. From province to province, messengers carried the decree, and fear swept through the hearts of the Jewish people. Families who had built lives in Persia suddenly faced the reality of destruction. In the city of Susa, Mordecai tore his clothes and wept openly in the streets, covering himself with ashes. His grief was not just for himself, but for every man, woman, and child whose lives were now in danger. The sight of him crying out in despair reached the palace gates, and Esther's attendants rushed to tell her. Inside the palace walls, Esther lived surrounded by luxury, yet she felt the heavy weight of isolation. She was queen, but she had no freedom to leave the palace without permission. She could not even speak to the king unless summoned. She knew nothing of the decree until Mordecai's desperate message reached her. And with that message came his plea. She must go before the king, reveal her identity, and beg for her people's lives. The conflict pressed in on all sides, leaving Esther torn between fear and calling, silence and sacrifice, survival and destiny. Esther's hands trembled as she read Mordecai's words. He reminded her that her position in the palace was not an accident, that perhaps she had come to the throne for such a time as this. Yet every part of her feared the law of Persia. To step into the king's court uninvited was to invite death, unless he extended the golden scepter. For days, she wrestled with the weight of the decision. But finally, she sent her answer back to Mordecai. "Gather the Jews in Susa, fast for 3 days, and she and her maids would do the same. Only then would she risk her life by going before the king." Her words echoed with both fear and determination. "If I perish, I perish." The days of fasting passed in silence and prayer, every heartbeat counting down to the moment of truth. Beyond the palace walls, the city was restless. Haman's decree still hung like a shadow over the people, and his pride grew stronger as he built gallows, planning to use them against Mordecai. Each day, his hatred burned brighter, and the king remained unaware of the storm rising within his own kingdom. At last, the morning came. Esther dressed in her royal robes, her heart pounding with every step. She walked toward the inner court, where the king sat on his throne. Servants lined the walls, their eyes watching closely, waiting to see what would happen. No one dared to speak. The law was clear. One wrong step, and her life would end before it even had a chance to begin. Would the king's face harden with anger? Would Haman's scheme succeed before she could utter a word? The air was thick with tension as Esther stepped into the light of the throne room, every second stretching like eternity. The throne room held its breath as Esther stood before King Xerxes, her eyes fixed on him, waiting for the signal that would determine her fate. At last, the golden scepter stretched toward her. Relief swept through the court, but beneath that moment of mercy, the danger was far from over. Esther bowed and touched the tip of the scepter, knowing her words had to be chosen with care. Instead of blurting out her true request, she surprised everyone, even Haman himself. She invited the king and his powerful official to a private banquet she had prepared. The invitation itself was mysterious. Why would the queen risk her life simply to host a meal? The king agreed without hesitation, intrigued by Esther's boldness. Haman, proud of being included, left the court with his chest high. But his joy quickly turned to fury when he passed Mordecai sitting at the palace gate. Once again, Mordecai refused to bow. Haman's anger was so intense that even his friends and family noticed. They urged him to act quickly, to build a towering gallows, and ask the king to have Mordecai executed before the banquet. Their words fueled his pride, and Haman commanded the gallows to be built immediately, rising high above the city as a dark warning to all who opposed him. That very night, however, another twist began to unfold. The king, unable to sleep, called for the royal records to be read aloud. Page after page was recited until one particular story caught his attention. It was the record of Mordecai uncovering a plot years earlier to assassinate the king. The discovery shocked Xerxes. Such a loyal act had never been rewarded. In the silence of the night, the king's mind turned with questions. How had this been overlooked? And what should be done now to honor a man who had once saved his life? As dawn broke, Haman hurried to the palace, ready to demand Mordecai's execution. But he had no idea the king's heart had shifted in the night. Two plans, moving in opposite directions, were now on a collision course. The queen's banquet loomed ahead. Haman's gallows stood waiting, and the king's unanswered questions hung in the air. The stage was set for a confrontation no one in Persia could have foreseen, where pride, courage, and destiny would soon clash with life-or-death consequences. The banquet hall glowed with golden lamps as Esther prepared to speak. The king leaned forward, eager to know the true reason behind her invitation, while Haman reclined at the table, confident that his power was secure. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Esther lifted her voice with steady courage. She revealed that her life and the lives of her people were in danger. She confessed her hidden identity as a Jew and begged the king to spare her people from destruction. The words struck like thunder in the hall. King Xerxes' face hardened. Who would dare to do such a thing, he demanded. Esther turned her gaze directly toward Haman. The enemy is this vile Haman, she declared. Shock rippled through the room as the truth pierced the air. Haman's pride crumbled into terror. He stumbled to his knees, pleading for his life, but the king rose in fury and stormed into the garden. In his panic, Haman threw himself toward Esther, begging for mercy. At that very moment, the king returned and saw Haman falling near the queen. His rage deepened. The guards moved swiftly, covering Haman's face as a sign of judgment. One of the officials spoke up, reminding the king of the gallows Haman had built for Mordecai. With bitter irony, the king commanded that Haman be executed on the very gallows he had prepared for another. The proud man who had plotted destruction now met his end through his own schemes. Relief spread quickly through the palace, yet the decree of death still hung over the Jews. Even with Haman gone, the law sealed with the king's signet could not be reversed. The people were still in danger, their fate undecided. Esther fell again before the king, weeping and pleading for her people's lives. Her courage had saved them from Haman, but another step was still needed. In an unexpected turn, the king granted Esther and Mordecai the power to write a new decree. Messengers sped across the empire with fresh orders. The Jews were allowed to defend themselves on the appointed day. What began as a sentence of death became a moment of deliverance. The climax thundered through Persia. Haman's fall, Esther's courage, and the survival of her people. Yet the memory of how close destruction had come lingered like a shadow, a reminder that destiny often hangs by a single choice of courage. The day that had once been marked for sorrow arrived, but it became a day of strength and victory. Across the Persian Empire, the Jews stood together, prepared to defend their lives. When enemies came against them, they did not stand alone. The king's decree empowered them, and fear of Mordecai, who now held high honor in the palace, spread throughout the provinces. What had been meant for their destruction turned into a day of deliverance. Families who once wept in fear now rejoiced in safety. The sound of mourning was replaced with celebration, and the memory of survival became a lasting testimony of hope. Mordecai rose to a place of great influence, second only to the king himself. His wisdom and loyalty, once overlooked, were now honored by the entire nation. Esther, the orphan who became queen, was remembered not only for her beauty, but for her courage to speak when silence would have been easier. She carried herself with humility, never forgetting the weight of the moment when her decision changed history. Her bravery inspired countless hearts, proving that courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. From that time forward, the Jewish people established a festival to remember their deliverance. They called it Purim, after the lots that Haman had cast to determine their day of destruction. What was once a symbol of despair became a celebration of God's providence and protection. Each year, families gathered to read the story, to rejoice, and to remind future generations that destiny can turn on the choices of the faithful. The story of Esther is more than history. It is a reminder for every listener. It tells us that no matter how small or powerless we may feel, our lives have purpose. It teaches that even in the darkest of times, when the odds seem impossible, courage and faith can open the way for deliverance. And it shows that what others mean for harm can be turned into blessing and victory. So as the tale closes, we remember Esther, the queen who risked everything, who found strength in her faith, and who stood at the very edge of fear to protect her people. Her story continues to echo through time, reminding us all that we too are called to moments of courage, and that divine destiny is often revealed when we dare to act with faith.